Hi everybody, this is Glenn checking in with you again. I couldn't actually be with you this time at last time, so I wanted to actually just create a video where we could share some of my best tips and techniques for creating sites in topography with you so that you can go ahead and use that to help guide you through the next phase of the assignment. So what we're going to do today is actually look at a couple of different ways that you can create topography and sites within Revit. And they're going to include tracing points from like a DWG file where a surveyor may have given us a sample, or a surveyor may have given us a file full of contours that were surveyed on the site. We'll also go ahead and take a look at something which is probably much more common, which is that you have an image that you've scanned in from a book or some sort of source that you found online of the site, and we need to create the topo surfaces based on that. The third way we're actually going to look at is probably the most powerful and the one that I really want to leave you with, and that's the whole notion that we can use Google Earth to go through and basically import the data. Google Earth actually has an incredible amount of satellite data stored right within it, so we can use that to go through and capture the site data and create topography from it. So let's go ahead and get started, and we're going to start just by looking at just the basic operation of how you create sites in Revit, and then we'll look at how we get that in from those different sources. So to get started with, what we'll do is we'll open up a new project file. Okay, here we're looking at just sort of a blank project file, and we're actually looking at level 1 right now. What I might want to do is, rather than sort of drawing the site on level 1, which is at a specific location, switch over to the site floor plan view. Okay, because the site floor plan view actually has one special thing set up on it, although we could set it up in any floor plan view, and that is actually showing the topography. And if you want to sort of see what I mean by that, go to the View tab, turn on the Visibility Graphics, and if you scroll on down the list, you'll actually find that the topography is one of the different items that's available to turn on or turn off. So we can turn it on in any of the different views, but I'm just going to go ahead and switch to Site since it's already turned on there. But you'll find as we keep on going, the first step is almost always go to Visibility Graphics and turn on the site topography. Okay, once you have that visible, it's pretty easy to go ahead and start creating a site. What you do is you switch over to the Massing and Site tab, and you'll find under there's something called a topo surface, and that's how we actually create sites in Revit. We create something called a topo surface, and if you choose that, we have a number of different modes in here that we're going to explore it with. First one's going to be called just placing points, and that's where we actually just put in numeric data values, absolute values for the height of the contour. The topography that we want to create. Later we're going to go ahead and look at this creating from an import. Okay, but let's start with just placing points. Let me kind of move on in a little bit closer. That's way on out there in scale. Since we're at 1 to 20 scale, you might want to adjust that to be something closer to what you want. Oh, maybe for your site you're looking at 1 in 16 or something like that. Okay, you place points by actually entering absolute elevations, and these can be positive or negative. So if you know that you have a site and everyone sort of scales the relative heights, you can either do it sort of based off of sea level. There's often some sort of datum for the region. Sometimes we go ahead and do this based on the comparing to the elevation of the first floor of the house. Okay, but whatever system you have, we can always move the site up or down. We just need to go ahead and put in the points so they're relatively at the right elevations. So I'm just going to start by putting in some points in. I'll start at just 0 level, and I'll just place some points. Okay, this is just sort of an abstract space, so it doesn't look like it's making much sense. When we put a map underneath this, it'll make a little more sense. Then I can start putting in some more points, maybe at the 2-foot contour. Then I'll put some at the 4-foot contour. And notice how this site is actually adapting and kind of reshaping itself as we go. Let me put something just at a 10-foot contour, maybe a couple way up here at the back of the site. And now we've created something with a pretty steep hill to it. Let me go ahead and finish that up so we can go through and take a look at that. If we look at that in 3D, let me orbit that around a little bit and shade it for you. So that's basically how we're going to go through and create sites, although we're going to learn how to do it with a little more control in just a few moments here. You can always choose a site. If there's something about the site you're not liking, you can choose the site and you can say edit the surface, and it'll make all those points available to you. And you can start pushing and pulling those points around. You can sort of push and pull them in XY space to kind of reshape things, although doing this in 3D view is not very helpful. Let me go ahead and switch that back over to the floor plan view. so you sort of get a better sense of what I'm doing there. Okay. We can also go through and just change the elevations of points. So if we choose that point, for example, you see its elevation's at 0 right now. I can make that, -4 and apply that. You'll see it'll actually create a little gully right there. We could also sort of add some more points in. If I have a point in here, and I know I'm going to put a point in of like 12, I'll put it out here and kind of add to the contours. So you can sort of add and subtract the points, move the points around, or change the elevations of the points very, very freely. So go ahead and just kind of think about creating sites in that way. That's kind of the most basic way if we're just trying to create the basic contours. But now what I want to do is actually go ahead and show you a couple of other operations that I think make it a little bit easier. Once we've got the notion of just placing points down, the next step is typically to go ahead and try to find some sort of map or a drawing that we can use that has some contours on it that we can use to trace to help sort of locate these points. So if we don't have the absolute values, we can often kind of just infer them by like a tracing off of some other drawing. So let's kind of show you a couple of different ways to do that. If you happen to be really lucky for your site, you'll actually have a DWG file that a surveyor may have given you. And if you have that, let's show you how you start with that, then we'll show you the other way, which is if we have to work with an image file. But to start with, let me go ahead and just create a new project file. Okay, again, we'll just sort of start from scratch. And once again, I'm going to go through and switch to that site view. Okay, and for this site view, the scale we should be using really just depends on just how big the site is. And the site that I'm going to bring in as a DWG file that I definitely do have a surveyor map for is really pretty large. So I'm going to go ahead and scale this out to, be like 1 to 100 or something like that. Just, that looks kind of odd, but we'll go ahead and work with it. Actually, yeah, we'll leave it at that. Okay. Next thing I'm going to do is go through and like bring in that DWG file. And if I bring in that DWG file, how I will do that is I'll go to the Insert tab. That's where I go out and load in different CAD drawings, different Revit models, whatever I need to get to. I'm going to say Import CAD. And where we actually have that located is inside the Dropbox. There's the Topo Plans folder, and inside there we actually put one in there just called Topo Base as an example for you. So if you want to follow along, just go out to the Dropbox folder and you'll find topobase.dwg. Okay, we'll leave most of these settings alone and just sort of accept them. It's going to import the Topo Base drawing. Put it in here. Let me kind of, you don't see anything right now, and that's because this base drawing is actually huge. It's for a whole site that we actually use for one of our projects. It's up in San Francisco, kind of near the ocean. So it's a very large site. You just can't see it right now. What I'm going to do is just sort of zoom on out so you can, and I can do that either by rolling my mouse button out. There, you can start to see it. I could also just say ZF, zoom to fit. Then you can see it too. But the site I'm interested in is down over here. So what I might want to do is just sort of move that entire kind of topo, that DWG, closer to the center. I can do that just by using the Move tool and kind of dragging it over, sort of get the area into the center of my model. Of course, we could always move that later. And what I'm going to be doing is sort of modeling this area up in here. This is, again, sort of a seaside site. The ocean is over here. This is near, the Cliff House, if anyone's familiar with San Francisco and Seal Rock. So this is basically a big bluff overlooking the ocean. And what we're going to do is we have a site where we actually model a little chapel project up on the bluff. You can see the height is somewhere between around 150, 160, 170, somewhere up in there. So in order to sort of model this, there's a couple things I'll want to do. One is, okay, I'm on the site, that's fine. On the site plan, there is already, if we go to Visibility Graphics, VG, I'm going to use the shortcut to get there. You can see that the site is actually turned on, or topography is turned on. Okay. One thing I'll want to do, though, is actually adjust the view range of this, because if I'm going to have something that's up at 150, 160 feet, something higher like that, and I want to see it, what I'll want to do is actually adjust the view range so I can see up that high. Okay, and typically, I'll actually have this set over from, I was doing a little practice before we got here. Typically when you open this up, this will be set to something like 4 feet and 7 feet, something like that. I'm just raising it up very, very high for this view to like 200 feet so that it'll clearly be above where the topography is. There will be no chance that it'll be underneath it or I'll be cutting through the middle of it. So if you need to, Again, what you do is you go to View Range by editing. You choose the floor plan view. Then in the Properties, you can choose the View Range. And then go ahead and change that up to something high like 200 or just something that's going to be above 150 and 160 so we can see our work. Otherwise, our cutting plane and our camera will be below where the areas where we're working and we won't be able to see what we're doing. Okay, so go ahead and say OK to that. And we will once again go to Massing and Site. Under Massing and Site, we'll choose Topo Surface. And with the Topo Surface, again, we're going to be placing points. We're going to kind of stay with that same basic way of operating. And as we're placing the points, what we're going to do is type in some values. For example, 150, if I'm going to trace that contour. And then I can come over here and just start placing points along this contour. Now, as you're placing your points, it's not important that you put one every foot or every 6 inches or every small increment, because you'll see as I go through and tracing, it does a pretty good job of following us along. And really, for the accuracy of what we're doing, it may not be critical to be right down to the inch in terms of what's going on, as opposed to sort of understanding the height side at a bigger level. But go ahead and put in enough points to kind of capture the contours in an interesting way. But again, don't sort of worry about every last point kind of being precise. You don't want to make your model so big that you just can't see anything anymore. Okay, so I'm putting in the 152s right now. Let me go ahead, I'm going to put in the 154s. Again, how I got these contours was just between the 150 and the 160 over here, there were 5 contours. So I was able to kind of figure out that they were at 2 foot contours. So I'll go through and put these in here. And put in some at 156. Just again sort of panning around and placing them in here. And I'll put in some at 158. We'll finish this guy up. Again, if you're finding that sort of the accuracy of what you're putting down isn't accurate enough and you want to sort of really kind of capture some interesting site detail, just go ahead and add some more points in. You'll actually see for this site what's happening is it's interpolating a little bit between the 2 foot contours. It's actually putting in a 1 foot contour line too. That's something we can control. Let me go ahead and just finish this surface by clicking on the check mark. Okay. Then for modeling the site, let me actually show you a group of settings. It's really hidden. I really wish it wasn't this hidden, but let me show you where it is. And that is when you look at the Massing and Site tab where it says Model Site, there's a little arrow that points down to the lower right. And if you click that, you'll actually get the whole idea of really what often to put the contour lines in. And here you'll see it's putting them in at every 1 foot. If I wanted to go through and put them at 2 foot contours, I could put it in there and it'll simplify the drawing down there. Or change that to whatever value makes the most sense to you. Okay, so that's just one of those things to kind of play around with. Okay, wish it wasn't so hidden, but again, where you find it is under Massing and Site. Once you've already sort of created the mass, you can go Massing and Site. Under the Model Site, there's a little arrow that points down. And if you click on that, you get the settings for where we could actually adjust the contours. Okay. Let's say OK to that. That's actually sort of an example of how we go through and create something using a topo map. And again, the nice thing about a topo map or a DWG file to trace from is it's probably scaled, it's probably already oriented to north. Everything about it is probably set up very nicely for what we need to do. I'm just going to rotate that around into 3D so you can sort of see. Actually, here's another sort of common technique you're going to get used to. The idea is we actually have that DWG and we also have our topo just right on top of each other. And it's a little hard to see. Let me shade it and see if you can actually see the topo. It's that little surface right there. So what you very often end up wanting to do after you've sort of done your work with the DWG is you could take it out if you just don't want to see it anymore. You can take it out. Or we can hide it. And we can hide it by either kind of right-clicking and saying hide in view and hide it that way. Another way you can do it is with a visibility graphics in a view. So again, view visibility graphics, and the DWG, which is imported, is called an imported category. We can just sort of hide its visibility right here. Okay, and then you can actually sort of see your topo. So sort of another little common technique. So that's how we're going to get started with working with sort of just DWGs. But again, this isn't the most common way, and we're going to go ahead and next demonstrate how I think you're probably going to have to work with it, which is starting with an image file and then kind of pulling the contours off of that instead. Okay, if you're doing good so far and you have the idea of placing points down and tracing contours, this next step is really just a small variation. The deal is, as opposed to having a DWG file which is already oriented and scaled, if we have an image that we scanned out of a book or we scanned off the web, we might have to do a little bit of adjusting to it to get it into the proper orientation and scale so that we can do that tracing from it. And that's what we're going to demonstrate in this next step. Okay, so here's how we'll do that. Again, let me go ahead and create a new project. Just starting from scratch, we'll say OK. Okay, once again, I'll do those different things. I'm going to switch over to the site view so that I can make sure that I'm looking at the topography, or the topography is visible in this view. And then I'm also going to go through and adjust the visibility or the view range so that we're kind of up above it. And well, let's look at the drawing first and we'll figure out where to do that. Okay, the drawing we're going to look at is actually one of the ones that Mary Lou's put up of the Jansen House. So let me open that up for you and we'll just take a look at that and do some planning based on it. Okay, here is a JPEG of the Jansen House. You can sort of see the house up there. It looks like its elevation is somewhere around 85, 76 feet, somewhere in there. There's all sorts of notations, it's handwritten on sort of the drawings about what's going on. Looks like there's a pad over here of some type. That might be, I can't tell if it's a garage or just sort of a parking pad, something like that, at about 90 feet up. But you can see the contours are at 65, 70, 75, 80, 85, 95, something like that. Ultimately, here's Skyline Drive on the back of the house. And then down below the house, actually, there's a kind of a continuation to one of the lots below. So this thing's elevated and flying above the contours. But we have contours that are somewhere in the range of, around less than 100, kind of within the 60 to 100 range. So let's go ahead and kind of work with this and see how we could model that using Revit. So I'll just kind of shrink that up so we can take a look. Back over here in Revit on the floor plan view, on the site plan, let's go ahead and I'm going to switch the view range so we can get ourselves, kind of around to that 100, somewhere in there. Being higher really wouldn't matter a whole lot because that would clearly be above the house. Okay, and now what we're going to do is actually just import that drawing. So we're going to start by importing it, but then we're going to do a little scaling and rotating to it. So let's go ahead and play with that a little bit. Okay, to import an image, you do this. Under the Insert tab, you'll find all these different choices about linking in CAD files, but one of them is an image file. So why don't you go ahead and pull that in. We'll just kind of say image, and we'll go out and find that. And the one that we're going to be using is called 1384-7 Jansen. So go ahead and pull that one in. Okay, again, that's out there in the Dropbox under the CMU Modeling Modern Topo Plans. You'll find 1384-7 Jansen. So say open to that. We'll drop it on in here. You're going to find that it's actually kind of big at first. I'm going to roll back on my mouse just to kind of scan or zoom out. Okay, we'll play with that. Okay, so there's basically the drawing. Now there's a couple things we're going to want to do to this just to kind of get it ready to work with. One is we're going to orient it around or rotate it around just a little bit to kind of change the orientation. The other thing we're going to do with it is just sort of rescale it. But let me do the orientation first. I kind of like to do that first. Okay, no reason, but just sort of the order that I like to do things in. To rotate this thing, what I can do is go ahead and choose the rotate tool. The rotate tool is just, if I have the image selected right now, there's this modify raster images tab, and I can choose the rotate tool. The rotate tool gives us a center of rotation, which is kind of happens to be right under the site base point too, and this arc that we can sweep. And what I'm going to do in terms of trying to create an orientation, let's think about this. What I tend to like to do is actually have my drawings or my model oriented so that the project north or the main walls of the house sort of line up perpendicular to kind of the boundaries of the model area, if that sort of makes sense. So even though project north over here, or true north, is actually just due west from what we're looking at right now, I'm going to try and basically rotate this drawing around so the house will sort of square up relative to my coordinate system. And I'll do that by I'm going to drag that origin of the rotation. I'm actually just pulling it down. Okay, and I can drop it right here, for example. And then I can sweep an arc. And I'm not doing a very good job of that. Let me zoom on in even closer so I can kind of really show you with some accuracy what I'm wanting to do. I'm going to drop it right on that point, and I'm going to try and basically pull a line on the drawing. And when I have that, I'm going to click there. That's going to create the arc that lets me rotate it, and I'm going to swing it up, and it turns out it's about 72 degrees. It'll snap when we get to a vertical. Okay, and that'll just rotate things around. Okay, and you can try that again. Let me do it one more time just in case you missed that. Okay, again, what I'm doing is going to choose that. I'm going to say rotate it. There's my rotation point. And I can really use anything that you consider to be a vertical line. For example, I could use the property line if we think that's going north-south. Then I'll pull along there. Sort of the further or the longer the arc, the better generally in terms of trying to get accuracy. And then it'll snap up. Okay, and now I at least have the house oriented sort of in what I consider to be like a project north. So it'll be a little bit easier to draw our walls and everything because everything will line up at 90 degrees. Okay. The next thing to do is to go through and do a little bit of rescaling to this. And what happens is when we scan in drawings or we bring them in from books, they're often just not to an accurate architectural scale. So fortunately on the drawing here, we have a line we can work with. We see that this property line at the bottom of the property is 82.31 feet large, or long. So what we can do is just leaving the, or if we need to reselect it, just kind of reselect the image. There's a scale tool. And the scale tool works like this. Okay. When you choose scale, you could either put in a numerical rescaling factor that you want to put in there, or you can indicate it graphically. It's really up to you, whichever way you want to do it. So let me talk about numerically, but then I'll show you how to do it graphically, because I think it's actually easier to do it that way. So for example, we know that line is supposed to be 82.31 feet long. I can choose the little measuring tool, then click over here, and kind of drag along that line and see if we can get to, what's it, 419 now or something like that. Something strange. Okay, I can go through and kind of write that value down, figure out that I want that to be 82.31, and then basically figure out what the scaling factor is between those two different things. Okay, so as opposed to 419 and 82, it wants to be about a fifth the size, something like that. So maybe I want to make a scaling factor of 0.2 or something like that to scale it down. So that's one way to do it, but let me show you even a kind of a quicker way, which is really just to kind of work with the graphics themselves to do the rescaling. So I'll choose that, and I'll say scale it, and I'll leave it turned to graphical here in the options bar. What I can do is this. If I click, it's saying click to enter an origin. I can click on sort of that point as the beginning of just some reference line that we know the distance of. Okay. Click to enter a drag point. So what I'm going to do is click all the way out here at the other end of the line that I know the length of. Okay. Then it wants to basically give me a new position for that drag point. And I can either drag it, or here's the trick. You can just type it, 82.31. Okay, and what will happen is it'll say, take that line, which used to be the full length, okay, and rescale it so it's 82.31. Okay, and that'll scale the entire drawing down for us. Okay, so again, let me undo that just so we can kind of do it again slowly for folks to catch up. And that is, we'll choose the drawing. We'll choose scaling. Okay, that's up here in the Modify Raster Images tab. Click on that. I can then choose the origin, which is right here. It wants to next choose the drag point. That's the other end of the line that you want to resize, or the vector you want to resize. I'll choose this one way out here. Then it wants to know basically where to rescale that to, and I'll type in 82.31. Hit the enter. Okay, and now hopefully that thing is scaled about right. Let's just kind of measure it to confirm. We'll grab our little measuring stick. We'll say from here to here, and that's about 82 and some odd. Okay, I think we're looking pretty good. Okay, so now we have a base drawing in place that we can sort of move. Let me just drag it up there into place, and we can start tracing from. Okay, now that we have our base drawing rotated into place and scaled properly, we're ready to start tracing those contours. But there's a couple things we might want to do just to also get ourselves started to kind of make the model more accurate. One thing that's sort of important when we're doing building models is to go through and kind of put in an accurate location, so to place the model appropriately kind of in geospace, so that we can get it to the appropriate kind of light and shadows. It's all very much based on sort of the latitude and longitude of the project, and actually where the true north of the project is, as opposed to the project north. So let's go ahead and look at those two things real quickly so we can sort of get our model set up properly before we go much further, because those are easy to forget about, and if we forget about them, then our shadows and everything are a little bit off and we give it an unexpected behavior. So let's go ahead and start with the location of the project, because that's actually sort of an easy one. To change the location, if you switch on over to the Manage tab, okay, so up at the top, switch to Manage, and then go ahead and take a look at, there's something called Location. Okay, we can use the Internet Mapping Surface to actually go through and find the latitude and longitude of this address. So try typing in there, like 8704 Skyline Drive, Los Angeles. See if we can find this place. Okay, looks like it found it there. Okay, that's a good thing to do in terms of grabbing it, because now when we say OK, the appropriate latitude and longitude are going to be registered for the project. So as we start playing with sun and shadows, it'll be sort of appropriate. Actually, if we were going to do energy modeling, which we're not doing right now for this class, that would also be useful because we'd have the right climate file and we have everything accurately located. Okay, one other thing though that I want to kind of show you about, which is a good thing to set, is the whole notion of true north versus project north. So let's talk about that. Project north is sort of this abstraction we often use because as we're drawing our drawings, we tend to like, and doing our models, we tend to like the things to have like, to be perpendicular to the X and Y axis. It just makes it a little bit easier for our drafting. It used to make it easier that way. But there is sort of the notion of the true north, and you can even see in this little base drawing that the north is actually not quite pointing at the top of the drawing. It's pointing off to the side a little bit. So what we'd like to do for the side is actually indicate and kind of tell the model really where is the true north so that we can get accurate shadows relative to the way it's truly oriented. And here's how you do that. This is going to sound a little bit strange, but this is how you do it within the Revit modeling environment, so hopefully it won't get too confusing along the way. Every view, if you look over here in the properties, and notice I don't have anything selected, I just have the view selected, has an orientation to it, and the orientation currently is showing Project North. Okay, that's what we typically have it set to. Almost all of the views we have it set to Project North. But if I want to go through and change the true north, and you only need to do this once, and then we'll turn it back off again, what I need to do is just switch the orientation from Project North to true north. Okay, and you'll notice that nothing happened. Okay, and that is because currently in the project there is no difference. Project North is the same as true north as far as it knows. The actual project is just at 0 degrees relative to the Project North. So that's okay. That's sort of what we would expect so far. So I just changed from Project North to true north. Okay, but now here's where we're going to indicate really what that angle is. What we need to do is with true north selected, okay, we need to go through, and I always have to find it here. It's under Manage, and there it is under Position. We can do something called Rotating True North. And how Rotating True North is going to work is we again have some angle we can swing. And what I'm going to do here is put it right at the base of that little arrow, that little kind of sight directional arrow. Looks like I almost lost it though. Let me try again. I'm in the middle of something and I think it's confused. Let's try again. Pull that down to there. Come on in. And what I'm going to do is basically, I'm a little bit off, but you'll get the idea. I'm going to sort of parallel that arc and swing it up. Okay, so that is actually true north on the house. So again, what I did was, let me undo it just so you can start to see it again. I have the oriented drawing. I'm going to choose position, rotate true north. Then I'm going to grab my little kind of rotation vector, and I usually put it as close as I can to the little directional arrow because that'll give us the best guidance. I grab that arrow or that arc, I swing it on over, and that'll rotate it up. Okay, what I've just done is I've basically just indicated the reorientation, what the rotation is. And again, that won't really affect us in much except the directionality of the shadows, but it's a nice thing to do. So once you've set that and it's there for your project, just go ahead and switch back to Project North again. Say apply that, there we go. And now Project North is okay, True North is okay. We'll draw in Project North, but as in terms of casting shadows and kind of working with sun, we'll have the appropriate kind of shadows because of the True North being understood. Okay, that's it for the whole True North and accurate location. We're ready to go ahead and start tracing our contours and making our site. Okay, let's go ahead and do that. We can, if we go through, well, actually, let me warn you about something about this one particular drawing, just so you sort of know about it, because it's a little bit funny, but it's kind of a common technique that gets used. You notice there's actually a break right here on the site, and that is we want to show the true length of 153 feet for the site, but they wanted to go ahead and fit it all on a single piece of paper. So they did a little bit of a cut right there in terms of what's going on. So watch out for that, just in particularly for this one drawing. This is supposed to be 153 feet over on the right-hand side, but it isn't right now. It's actually drawn a little bit with a cut in it, so it's not quite to scale. You can if you want to. Let's go back to Massing and Site. Okay, put in property lines by sketching, for example, and I can sketch all the property lines. So I can come on down here in this direction. In fact, this might not be a bad way to do it. You can see that it's supposed to be 153. I can just type in 153. And you see the property line would actually go out to there, kind of hanging off the distance. Notice it's warning me, oh, put that up there. Revit's warning me the highlighted lines do not form closed loops. That's okay. That's because I haven't finished closing the property line right now. If I go ahead and close everything and kind of do a good job with my property lines, ultimately, let me go ahead and just grab this line too. Even though I know it's not to the right location, I'll just grab the length, or I can get the orientation. Make that 82.31. Might as well be numerically accurate about that stuff. Then I can go ahead and move. Again, this is something I would never typically do, but it's only because this site's a little bit strange that I've had to do this in terms of pulling that on down there. Up here at the top, oh, I'm just going to simplify it. What could I do? What do we do with a spline? That might work out okay. Didn't do a very good job with my spline, but I'll go ahead and fix it up now. That's close. In the interest of time, I'll go ahead and sort of speed through that, and I'll go through and close this up. Okay, fantastic. Oh, it's telling me these two lines can't intersect. They do intersect currently. Let me kind of take a look at what's going on. If I get way on down, something about when I did the move, they're not quite right. Let me trim them. I'm going to just trim this one against that one. Can I do that? Will let me? See if that'll work. Oh, those are okay now. Let's see which ones are intersecting, because it's not that one. Oh, I see. There's actually two lines on top of each other. Okay, that's better. Let's try that. We're following sort of what I'll call pink line rules, like when we're drawing floors or roofs, we have to have a continuous pink boundary. And let's see if we got that now. We do have that now. We have accurate property lines. Beautiful. Okay, even though ours are different than what's showing in this drawing, that should be accurate. Although, It's kind of an interesting issue here in terms of if the lengths are right and the angles are right, then this length would be a little bit different in terms of what's going on right there, I think. Let me try something else. I'm going to do the annotations. Let me do something where I tag. And I can tag the property line length. It's called a civil annotation. Yeah, that's 82.31. What I'm finding is, this is actually sort of interesting, and we find this with a lot of old drawings when we trace them, is there's some sort of inaccuracy in the way this is originally drawn, because numerically, if it really is 82.31 across the bottom, that really is 153 and all that type of stuff, this property line over here on the side is a little bit suspect in terms of what's going on. And I'm not going to resolve that right now with you guys, but watch out for that. That sometimes happens when we go ahead and pull in drawings from other places. So don't sweat that for now. We'll just go ahead and let that be. Okay, so we've entered the property lines. We're in pretty good shape there. Let's go ahead and start tracing our contours. Okay, with our property lines in place, we are ready to massing in sight, create a topo surface. We'll again place some points, and it's going to be very similar to what we've done in the past. We're going to go through and just go through and enter some absolute elevations, for example 65. Then just start tracing that contour as accurately as you want to. Okay, what's next? Next is our 70 contour. This is actually a pretty steeply sloping site. So let me go ahead and grab that one. Actually, what I may want to do, let me turn on wireframe just so I can sort of see the contours through, because what's happening is as it's guesstimating, I need to place some points kind of in the middle. I don't want them to be obscured, so I can see what I'm up to. Okay. Let's go for 75. And we'll go for 80. And you'll see it's actually pretty easy to go through and create these contours. Maybe I'll get the 85s and we'll finish up for there for right now. Fantastic. When you're feeling good about all that, hit the check mark to finish the surface. You can go back into 3D and take a look, and there we have something, which is our site. Okay, and kind of following the hills or the contours of the hill down. So fantastic. Okay, we're in good shape. We can go ahead and save that away if you want to, so we have something to work with. Okay. But what I want to do now is actually show you the third and actually what may be one of the easiest methods for going through and getting these things, but probably not quite as accurate as having the JPEG or the DWG, but kind of really good when you have a big site and you need to get some data fast. And that's to actually use a combination of Google Earth and Google Sketchup to kind of make this happen. Okay, let me show you how that works, because it really is kind of incredibly kind of powerful. What happens is, well, let me go open up SketchUp and we'll talk about it. So here we are in SketchUp. Good old SketchUp 8 is the version I'm looking at right now. And it's tied into Google Earth in such a way that we can access the Google Earth data, which includes an awful lot of satellite data. All sorts of data got measured that it's not as accurate, okay, as actually having a surveyor's plot, but it's pretty good as a starting point in terms of getting things in, and it's pretty hard to beat the quickness of doing this. So what we're going to do is as follows. Okay, here I am over in SketchUp, and if you want to open up SketchUp and kind of follow along, please do. We're going to go ahead and do something called, oh, I always have to find it in here. That's toggling the terrain. It's right next door to it, I believe, where we add a location. Okay, and if I choose add a location, this looks somewhat familiar. This is like, oh, in fact, well, I already even have the location because, yeah, you'll notice I was doing a little practice before we started the video. But let's kind of show you it again. 8704 Skyline. Drive, Los Angeles, California. Do my little search. Hopefully it'll come back to the same place. Okay, there we are, and that looks like the house right there. I can kind of zoom in or zoom out a little bit. This is actually oriented towards proper north, so the Skyline Drive is up here. Here's the, is that Arlene? Arlene Terrace down below. We can sort of see the property right here, a little retaining wall around the property below. Okay, we are ready to go. Okay, what you got to do is basically sort of roll in or roll out, just sort of zoom in or zoom out to sort of see the part that you actually want to capture. You don't want to capture too much data, then your model just gets bigger than it needs to be. But when you sort of have about what you like, say select region, then we can sort of move these pins to getting closer to what we like. Yeah, something like that looks pretty good for what we need to study in this house. Okay. When that's all looking good and you have enough of the site to kind of make yourself happy, click on the grab button. Just go ahead and click right up here on the upper right hand side, grab. Okay, and it'll bring it in. Okay, and it doesn't look very exciting yet. Let's go ahead and orbit it around a little bit. There's Susan kind of hanging around on the corner of the site right now, but the site's looking very flat. Don't worry about the fact that the site looks very flat right now. We just need to go through and turn on something called toggling the terrain, and it's right next door. So here's this guy adding the location. Let's go ahead and toggle the terrain, and you'll see, oh, that is actually a pretty dramatic site. So you can sort of see the little hill up here at the top where Skyline is. Let me see if I can move that on down so we can sort of change our view. There's Skyline kind of coming through. Here's the house, and here's a really pretty dramatic drop-off. Right over there, kind of going down into that little, what do I call it, ravine, gully, whatever you want to call that. Okay, so this is the terrain we want to go through and capture. So got the idea? Okay, it turns out it's quite easy to capture this terrain because all this information is really a big old 3D DWG file, or can be available to us that way. So we've got all the terrain. Don't worry, we got that stuff. That's actually pretty easy. But before we go ahead and pull that into Revit, what I want to do is just do a couple things more to it here in SketchUp to make our life a little bit easier once we get into Revit. And that is, this photograph that we're looking at actually has some data that's useful to us. Now, it doesn't look so useful this way because it's all distorted to match the terrain. Let me go ahead and just kind of change the camera view to, the top view, okay? And, maybe even untoggle the terrain right now, just kind of flatten the whole thing out. Because what we're going to do, actually, let me switch that back again to top view so we get a nice dead-on view. And I'll sort of pan that around a little bit. Here's what's sort of useful to me about this view. Before I go on off and take that terrain in there, the image of the road and even where the house is located on the site is really kind of useful to me, just to sort of reorient kind of some built features with the natural terrain features. Because when the natural terrain comes through, you can't always tell where the built features are on it. So what I'm going to do, and this is just sort of something I like to do to kind of clean things up, make it a little bit easier to kind of pull some information across, is to come through and we can start drawing and draw some lines. You can also draw some freehand arcs, but what I like to do is just sort of, trace in this view whatever I can that sort of, gives me sort of a rough approximation of really where the house is going to be. And I'm not a very good tracer. I'll be the first to apologize about that. So I can sort of figure out about where the house is. What am I doing here? Again, it's just sort of giving myself some approximations to just help line this stuff up all a little bit later. So that's about where the house is. Similarly, where the road is kind of useful to me. Again, let me switch back to that camera. I keep on orbiting it, and I don't want to do that. I want it to be relatively flat, so when I trace, I'm really tracing straight down. And for this one, I can do individual line segments. I'm actually going to switch to a draw tool called the freehand tool, and just really slowly and carefully see if I can trace the boundary of Skyline Drive up here. Okay, and what this is all about, this is just all about sort of creating some sort of references to help me sort of relative to my topo data, try to locate these features. Okay, so there's thereabouts, something like that. Okay, again, not very accurate, but close enough for what we need to do to get ourselves started. So let me retoggle that terrain back on. And what you'll find is if you go through and orbit it around, is you'll see that I've drawn those lines. They're kind of just hanging down there right on the 0, 0 plane. But that's okay. They can live there for right now, and we'll go ahead and use them in a few minutes. Okay, so we have our site. We've toggled the terrain. We sort of free-handed some things in there that we wanted to go through and trace. Let's go ahead now and export this thing. Now, for bringing it over to Revit, the best format, if you export it, is something called, under 3D Models, to take it out as a DWG file. Okay, now, if you have the freebie version of SketchUp, this isn't available. It's only available kind of in the Pro version, and as a student, I'd highly recommend getting the Pro version because it's only like, like $60 or something like that. It's definitely it's a bargain in the scheme of things. Okay, but if you have the Pro version, this is available to you there. If you don't have the Pro version, we could also do this using an older version of SketchUp, the free version. Any SketchUp 6 and prior had this built in, the exporting the DWG. And if you need some help with that, kind of contact me. I'll tell you where we can go ahead and get that. Okay, but if you have the Pro version, you'll find that you can export a DWG. Now, of the different options, let's go and take a look at those, because some seem to work better than others. Click on Options. I actually like to switch back to AutoCAD 2004. And there's just sort of a thing about the different file formats. I have better luck in terms of bringing things in that older AutoCAD format. Not sure why that is, just something about the way the file translation works. But make sure you do have the faces, the edge, the construction geometry, all these things turned on, because if you only have a few things, if you only have edges, when I was practicing, I only had that. I didn't get the topography. I actually needed to get the faces. So make sure all those things are turned on so you have access to all of them. Say OK. Oh, let's go ahead and actually give it a name before I say OK to close the export options, and I'll give it a name. I'll call it the Jansen. Am I spelling Jansen right? I think I'm not. Okay, Jansen Site Topography 3, just so I can distinguish it from the ones I was practicing with. Let me pull that up so you can actually see all these things. There was the options. In case this was off the screen a few seconds ago, this is options. And there's AutoCAD 2004 and all of those things turned on. Say OK. Then here's Jansen Site Topography. We are ready to say export it. Okay, it says that it's exported it OK. Super. We are in great shape. So let us go ahead and say OK to that. Okay, and we're ready to switch ourselves back over to Revit and bring in that 3D DWG. Okay, we are ready to go ahead and pull that over to Revit. What I'll do is just open up Revit instead. And once again, we'll create a new project. Got a brand new project. I'm going to switch over again to the site view. Check using visibility graphics. VG is the shortcut I used to get out there. That topography is visible, and it is indeed. Okay, we are ready now to actually start importing and working with this thing. So let's kind of talk about that. We imported an image last time, and that was kind of fine for doing our tracing. But this time what we want to do is actually insert, and we can import a CAD file. We can also link to the CAD file. Either way will work. It really depends on whether we want to have it in our drawing or be referring to it externally. I'll import it just kind of for the sake of simplicity right now, but later we'll talk about why linking is sometimes a better thing to do to conserve memory. But let's go ahead and import it. And I will go on out to, where did I put it? On my machine. It's in Documents. And Jansen House, spelled incorrectly. I noticed later. And then let's grab that. Okay, so something comes in that looks like a big old grid, okay, of all sorts of different points. And if we roll over to 3D, you can actually sort of see even what's going on. There's a couple different things in there. You'll notice there's sort of this sort of slopey layer, which is the actual topography. There's kind of a flat layer right in there. That's like level 0, where those lines that we drew are located. Okay. And this is what we're going to go through and convert into what we want. Okay, so here's how we do it. We go through and take this thing, Okay, big old thing. It's got a blue box around it. That's the look but don't touch box because it's an imported piece, and you want it to kind of like live as a kind of thing that has all the layers in it, just the big imported DWG. But what we can do is switch to massing and site, say that we're going to create a topo surface again. Okay, and this time, as opposed to placing points, which is what we've been going to consistently these last couple of times, we're going to say created from an import. And we say create from an import. What we do is we can either sort of choose a points file. If you have a big old Excel file that came from your surveyor full of a lot of data points, we could use that. But we're going to choose select an import instance. And that's where we can actually go through and select this DWG. So I'll choose that big old DWG. It's going to ask, of all the things out there, which are the things that we want to use to go through and try to create the data points for the Earth, or for the terrain. And turn off 0. Let me tell you about that. 0 on the 0 layer, that's where we actually drew those roads and the house boundary and stuff like that. If that's on, it'll just confuse things. So for what we're doing now, turn that off. You can also turn off the snapshot, because that's not really where we're going to get the points either. All the points are coming from the Google Earth terrain layer. So go ahead and say OK to that. And you'll get a gigantic topo surface. Now, let me go ahead. I'm going to just do that again just because it may be a little bit confusing. But let me even kind of close out of here. And we'll do that one more step just so people can get a chance to catch up. I'm going to go through and say massing and site, topo surface, create from import, and then select the DWG file. Select import instance. Then I can go through and choose that. Okay. In terms of what to try to pull the data points from, again, turn off 0 because 0 is not interesting. Layer 0 has all those lines we drew. And we'll turn off the snapshot. We only are concerned about, okay, the terrain. It'll complain a little bit, but that's okay. And when we say finish, we'll actually have a gigantic topo surface. Okay, which we can then start using for our modeling. And if you want to, you can shade that. Now, it's a little bit messy right now. It's hard to see what's going on because in terms of what's going on, the DWG is there as well as you're also seeing the topo surface. And they're really like right on top of each other. And that's kind of making it a little bit confusing for you. So what we can do in that same kind of sense of visibility graphicsing and turning things on and turning things off is let's use visibility graphics just to hide that DWG, or at least a piece of the DWG for now. What I'm going to do is under View, say Visibility Graphics, and then under the imported categories, that's where it's living right now because it's an imported DWG. Let me just turn off, I'm going to turn off the terrain layer. I'm also going to turn off the snapshot. I'm going to keep the 0 layer around because we're going to use that in just a few minutes to actually trace the road boundary and figure out where the site's going to be located. Okay, or where the house is going to be located on the site. But turn off those others. Okay, and now you get something that's a whole lot smoother in terms of what's going on. Okay, so that's actually the site. Again, this site has, contours at every 1 foot. So if you want to go ahead and change that to make the contours every 5 feet or something like that, you can. That would be that would look more like the actual drawing does, something like that. Just the accuracy is still there, the site's still there. It's just a matter of how often it draws the contours for you. Okay. And now we're ready to go through and start playing around with this. Okay, so things we can do. Let's go ahead and take a look at it in a couple of different views. One thing we can do is look at it in the elevation views. So for example, if I go to the south elevation, or let me go to the west elevation, I'll look at it sort of from the side. Okay. We have this whole issue of really what our floor levels are. Okay, so relative to this site, and this takes a little bit sort of figuring out, about really what we need to do to the site, and moving things up and down, and trying to figure out where the house boundary is and stuff like that. I think this site's actually, if I'm guessing, probably a little bit too low. We may need to sort of move it up or move it down relative to 0. Or you even need to think about really how you want to sort of use the site relative to the floor levels of the house. For example, if you're saying that the level of the house is at 0, okay, And we know that on the drawings, the level of the house was around 80 or something like that. What we may need to do is just sort of move the entire site up or down, kind of relative to that plane, just so you have the right relative relationship between the site and the house. Okay, and I know that sounds a little bit confusing, but you just got to figure out which scheme you're going to use as your referencing system, whether you're going to use the house's floor as a relative to zero, or as level zero, or you're going to use kind of sea level. Okay, and once you sort of figure out what you're going to do, what you need to do is just take this and you can sort of move just by choosing the side and choosing it. You can sort of move it up or down. Actually, in that case, what did I do? Yes, and that's the DWG that's underneath it there. Hang on. Let me, in this other view, do the same thing. I'll visibility graphics, and I'll just turn off the DWG so we're not seeing it there. So we can be a little bit clearer about what I'm moving around. That's actually the site, not the DWG. Okay, so you may need to do a little messing around to sort of figure out exactly how the site and the house and really how you want to sort of set the absolute elevations relative to each other. Okay, so I'll leave that one for you guys to play with a little bit in terms of figuring that out. Another thing we may need to do, just in terms of sort of playing with it, is, well, actually, it'll probably be okay now since I've moved the site down a little bit. I'll actually move it up a little bit higher. What happens is, as you look at the floor plan views, there's the whole notion of the cutting plane. And again, let me go ahead and, for this one, turn off that. Okay, so we're just looking at that. But if we go to level 1, for example, and again, we'll turn off the site. Okay. Then we also have to turn on the topography. I'm sorry, I should have done those both. There's this notion now of really what is, how much of the topography is showing. What's happening in the floor plan views is, because the view range is set to be 4 feet above the cutting plane, okay, what's happening is all of the site which is above that 4 feet is being cut off. That's what's happening up here. And all these contour lines are really for the site that's below us right now. So just in any one view, you may need to go through and adjust the view range. Level 2 will probably show us more of it. Again, let me turn off that so we're not looking at it. And while I'm at it, I should go through and turn these on. Okay. In fact, let us do this. Since I keep on, you notice I keep on popping in and out to the visibility graphics. That gets annoying. Let me show you a shortcut that'll actually make your life a little bit easier for that. And what you do there is you can say, oh, it's under view. Let's basically create a template from the current view, and we'll call it, oh, let's say hide the DWG and show the topography. Not a very neat looking name, but a very descriptive name in terms of what's going on. And what I can do then is say that for the visibility graphic overrides on the import, which included kind of turning off the Jansen site, that'll be there. And then also in terms of the visibility graphics for the model, which included kind of turning on the topography, those things will be there. Okay. And why did I do this? The big reason for doing it is with that view template, I can come over to another floor plan view, say apply the view template, and go and just choose that, and it'll real quickly get those two different settings. That'll just save you some time. That's all I'm doing there. Okay, so we got our topography, we got our, we're pretty much ready to go. We got the contours here, all that kind of looks good. There's just a couple things I want to show you to kind of complete this, and that's really how we kind of basically indicate where the roads are and put a pad on for building our buildings. So let's go ahead and do that next, and then we'll go ahead and get ourselves finished up for today. So for our final steps, we're going to take our topography and just do a little kind of customization to it to really kind of add in some of the features that you need to start putting your building on it. I'm going to switch back over to that site view, and what I'm actually going to do is just switch it over to a wireframe view. And the reason I'm doing that, well, I thought it was going to work in terms of what I wanted. Let me go and do a look at my visibility graphics again, because, oh, for the Jansen over here, I do want to go through and turn on the 0 layer. That's what I want to see, because on that 0 layer I had drawn a couple of things. For example, the road boundary, and the side of the house pad. Okay. So now if you come in there, you can sort of see approximately where the road boundary is and where the house pad is. Okay, and we're in pretty good shape. So let's go ahead and kind of think about how we can use these things. Okay, the deal is the big old topography here is a big old, like just earth. It's just kind of sloping on down there. But we have different features we may want to go through and call out and highlight. For example, where the roadway is, or sort of put that pad in to build on. So let's kind of think about each of those. When you choose your topo surface, and you go to Massing and Site, there's actually a couple of choices that are available to us that I want to let you know about. One's called Subregion, and one's called Split Surface, and let's talk about what each of those is for. Okay, Subregion, which is the one I'm going to teach you how to use today, is really all about just taking that topo surface and taking a piece of it and just applying a different material to that piece of it. So a subregion says keep the same contours, keep the same topography, it's just we're going to change some property of it, for example the material, making it asphalt or something like that, so it can illustrate the roadway or a driveway or something like that. Splitting the surface is a little bit different. In splitting the surface, what happens is you actually are creating two different distinct surfaces. So you can cut away part of the topo surface if you only want some piece that you're interested in, okay? Or you could go ahead and cut off a part and then sort of start regrading it or recontouring it a little bit differently. So the difference is whether it's just sort of two different materials on the same object or whether it's two separate objects that you can really manipulate and control completely separately. So what I tend to do on something like this is I'll just do a subregion as opposed to splitting the surface. If I was going to regrade the road or put in a driveway or kind of do a lot of things that are sort of moving the surface around, then I would split it. But subregion is kind of the easy one. Let's start with that. Subregion basically says we've got a topo surface we're looking at over here. Actually, let me pop out of this again just so you can see how I got here. Let me choose the topo surface. And actually, I take that back. It's interesting. That'll let us edit it. Maybe it'll let me do it right on top of it. Subsurface, maybe just draw it right on top of wherever it is. But what I'm going to do is go through and draw something to sort of simulate the roadway over here. I can do that as splines if I want to. Let's see if I can sort of trace this. What I'm doing is trying to basically trace those roadway lines that I put in there earlier. Okay, and I can go through and go pull the points and kind of adjust all that a little bit. And this is just sort of an approximation. Okay, now it may be easier for us to go through and just do an offset on the other side because we know that road is probably like 25 or 30 feet wide, something like that. So I can just do something like that. Okay, and get the other side of it. Okay, so now that we have those two boundaries on the roadway, we can go ahead and cap it off on the two sides. Let me just go ahead and draw a vertical line on this side of the boundary, or this side of the site. Oops, let me go ahead and turn off that offset. We don't need that anymore. So we'll cap it off on this side, and I will cap it on this side. Maybe trim that up. I'm going to use TR and then see if I can trim those two. Oops, maybe trimming won't work with the splines. So no worries. Let's see if we can just pull those back. Because I do need to create a continuous pink boundary. Well, there's the extra one over there. And let's see if we can do the same thing over here. Maybe splines weren't such a good choice in terms of doing this. We'll leave it at that for now. So go ahead and finish that up. Oh, still open on one end. So let's go ahead and see if we can get that cleaned up. Oh, there it is. There we go. Let's finish that. Okay, great. We have the continuous loop, so now we can go through and change that surface if we need to. Here's the deal. Now that we've gone ahead and created two separate subregions, as opposed to just being the single surface, which has a single material, which would typically be the material for the earth. Okay, we can go through and change it to something different. For example, if I want it to be a roadway, I can choose materials. Maybe switch that out to an asphalt material instead. We'll say OK to close that. Let's shade that so we can see what that looks like. Okay. And now you see we actually have the two different surfaces in there. We have the shaded material as well as with the asphalt, as well as the material for the earth itself. Okay, that doesn't look quite right. Let me go through and edit that boundary a little bit. I'm not quite happy with that. Let me go back to the floor plan. Turn back to wireframe. It just didn't end up looking very good when I did all that sort of resizing and reshaping based on trying to get the boundaries to work. That turned out to be a pretty far deviation from what I hoped that line to be. So let me go ahead and fix that. I guess the lesson here is be more careful about where the endpoints are going to be if you're using splines, because they don't reshape themselves very nicely. Okay, let's try that again. Let's see what's going on here. Is there one there? It says they currently intersect. Let's go take a look. Oh, there we go. It's off by a hair. As some of you who've been doing Revit modeling know, the pink line mode can be very, very unforgiving. There we go. Switch that back over. Okay, that's looking a little bit better in terms of the roadway. Okay, that was one thing we wanted to show you. So you can go through and add things like the roadway. The other thing you'll often need to do, and it won't necessarily be so critical for the Jansen House, because the Jansen House actually floats above the ground, but if you have a house that's actually sort of submerging into the ground, is you'll need to go through and create something called a building site. So let's talk about that. In general, for like this Jansen House, if we go through and we go put in some sort of floor, I'll just go and draw a floor in sort of a very generic sense. And I'll just kind of put it over the ravine here. Let's take a look at that. You'll see, we can elevate this thing so it's up above the house. My levels aren't set properly. But typically, things can float up above it. The problem is if we have something that's sort of recessing down into the ground, and let me sort of draw it kind of at that level. Do the wireframe again. Let's see what's going on here in terms of making that visible. I want to get those zeros available. There we go. So I can see where I thought that house outline would be. What I need to do is, or if I create things as a floor, let's start with that. If I create things as a floor and just go through and try to trace those boundaries, what's going to happen is that floor is going to be submerged into the ground. Okay, so let's take a look at that in 3D. So here we have it, but you see that the floor is kind of buried by this dirt that's happening up behind it there. Okay, and that's something we don't necessarily want to have happen. So what I need to do is actually go through and rather than creating a floor, let me get rid of that floor, okay, is create a special kind of surface. It's just a type of floor that really is good for suppressing the earth, and it's called a building pad. So let's take a look at it, because again, let me pop back out again so we can get there slowly. I'll switch over to the Massing and Site tab and choose Building Pad. And within there, it looks just like creating floors. I could do the thing where I'm tracing the boundaries just like I did before, or draw the boundary, whatever it is. But all you have to know about a building pad is that it is a floor that has the special property of it'll suppress the earth if the earth is cutting up through it. It'll also fill underneath the building pad if we need to. If we're not quite touching the earth, it'll make the earth come up and touch it. So let me go ahead and do that and show you what it looks like. Okay, So here's what a building pad looks like, and I can even elevate that a little bit if I want to, or lower it down a little bit. Let me turn off that 3D view, or the DWG, so it's not bothering us anymore. So the building pad has a special attribute. It'll fill when it's above the earth. It'll cut in when it's below the earth. And you kind of just need to decide really which one you want to do. For Jansen, I don't think you'll need to use this because your house is pretty much floating above the space. But if you need to cut down into the site, the building pad's your tool for doing that. And once you've gone through and created a building pad, you can now go through and add other things to it. For example, on this back wall here, we'd probably want to add some sort of retaining wall. Let's take a look at that. Where we're cutting into the earth, we could go through and put in some sort of a wall. We have some retaining wall types in here, but they could really be any sort of wall that you want to. And let me just sort of draw one in here. I'll say this is going to be the exterior face. So okay, and that may not be the right height right now. We can go through and adjust it. Oh, I know, it's because that we said was it going to be at level 1 minus 5. I actually gave it sort of a funny level there. And then, oh, make it 10 feet tall or whatever it is. It'd be better to go ahead and set this to the levels as opposed, but you might need to add some retaining walls in there as necessary to hold the earth back. That'll really just sort of depend on your site. The very final thing we'll show you is how you can actually go ahead and add some things to your site, like some site features or trees and stuff like that. That's real straightforward. That's a type of component, and you can find them under massing and site. You'll find site components. They're actually in the other location too. But if you choose site component, you'll find things like some different tree types that are already loaded in. I'll just use the red ash for now. And if you place trees in 3D, watch this. There's sort of this very nice attribute where they go through and place themselves at the appropriate level. They'll try to go down and basically hug the site. So if we put them up high on the hill, they'll sort of, the base will be at the top of the, or will be higher. If you put them down lower, it'll be there. And for any of these different tree types, we can go through, change their types. A gigantic oak tree in there, which wouldn't be appropriate for California, or that part of California anyway, but we can adjust those. Again, those look kind of funny right now because they're just these 3D abstract representations, but if we go through and render these, you'll see they actually kind of turn out to look proper. So that's probably good enough to get you going today on the whole issue of sites and topography. So why don't you go through and start playing with these skills and practice them and ask some questions, sort of run into some walls, see what sort of issues you run into as you try to model your houses, and sort of send us different sort of questions and requests about things you're having trouble with, and we'll get them answered through the week. But good luck getting yourself started with all that type of stuff, and I'm going to look forward to seeing you all next week when we'll be back online with you, and then in a couple weeks when we're actually there in person. So you guys take care, and good luck with the assignment this week. Okay.